We can well understand the sense of discomfort that the disciples have as they hear Jesus saying that he's going to leave them and go to the Father. It speaks to those uncertainties in life where we don't know exactly what the next step is. It speaks also to those in-betweens in life where we're waiting for something to happen and yet we're unsure of the future step. We're uncertain as we maybe wait for a medical diagnosis, or a high school student graduating is waiting to see what college they're going to go into, or how in fact things are going to work out in a very difficult financial situation. That waiting seems so often to be a waste of time, and we feel a sense of discomfort about that in-between time in life. One of the sayings that I've always liked of St. Catherine of Siena is that when we are on the way to heaven, when we're in that middle time between time and eternity, when we're on their way to heaven, we already are in heaven, because Jesus says, I am the way. And so it's an opportunity for us during the season of the Lord's resurrection to really look at how those moments of in-between, the times that we're waiting, is not a waste of time, but is a moment of grace for us. We first of all have the grace of just slowing down. Life can be so frenetic and hectic. By just waiting, by taking that time, the in-between, we slow ourselves down to, in many ways, appreciate other things in life, especially appreciate one another. During the pandemic, I talked to a lot of families who many times did not have time to have evening meals together, but found themselves locked in because of the restrictions on movement and going outside. For the first time in a long time, they sat down to a meal every night and had a chance to get to know each other more deeply. That sense of being able to slow our life down to appreciate one another. But it's also the kind of waiting that people have as they walk with the person who has a terminal illness. I always like that very strong statement that Victoria Kennedy, the widow of Senator Ted Kennedy, wrote when the Massachusetts legislature was considering assisted suicide. She told people in that wonderful letter that even though he was diagnosed to be able to live only 4 months, he lived 15 months, and it was a very rich time as they were able to find a depth of their relationship that they never had before. And that is why it's important to make sure that that waiting time for death to come, for an answer to come, is not a waste of time. But it's also important to see that in that waiting, so often we are surprised by the outcome in a way that does enrich our lives. There's a wonderful example of that in the Roman Basilica of St. Peter's, when Bernini built the baldacchino over the altar for the Pope Urban VIII. He wanted to stress how in life we go through different stages, and there is some surprise that comes in our life. And so he depicted the Pope's niece who underwent a very difficult pregnancy. And there were different scenes carved in marble on that baldacchino of his niece going through the stages of giving birth to a child. She had a face that was anguished because of the contractions. And then we begin to see that the pain is even more intense, and she begins to scream. Her mouth is wide open. But then the final scene, her face is not there anymore, but it's the face of the newborn child, of the little cherub-looking child who in fact is the joy of that moment of birth. So often in life, the waiting that we do, the patience that we have, is well rewarded as we see how the birth of a child or the outcome that we never expected comes to light for us. And so today, it's an opportunity for us to look at the in-between times, that waiting time, to take time out for prayer in those moments, to to let ourselves, our hearts know that we need to slow down from the frenetic pace and that Jesus is with us because he is the way. But also to allow that time to reach out to others and to maybe appreciate them more, especially those who are troubled, those who need our assistance, or maybe just our family members so often that we seem to overlook because our life has been so fast-paced. But also to realize that the waiting so often can bring a richness to our life. Jesus tells us today not to be afraid. Do not let our hearts be troubled. Because as St. Teresa or St. Catherine said, when we are on the way to heaven, we are already there, for Jesus is the way.